The gathering of these facts explains the complementary attitude of the unconscious toward consciousness. What if the emptiness you feel isn't proof that you're broken, but proof that something deep within you is finally coming back to life? There's a strange, almost sacred stillness that follows every storm. The ground is wet, the air heavy, and the colors seem to fade into gray. You look around and think the garden has died, that all the beauty has been washed away. But under the surface, life is quietly rearranging itself. Roots are finding new directions. The soil is breathing again, and the unseen pulse of creation begins to stir. Healing is often exactly like that. It looks like nothing, yet everything is happening. After emotional collapse, it's easy to mistake the silence for failure. You wake up and the world feels unfamiliar, like you've been erased from your own story. There's exhaustion that no sleep can touch, and a hollowness where your emotions used to live. You try to pray, to talk, to distract yourself, but the words echo back empty. Nothing moves. And so you ask the question everyone asks in the aftermath of pain. What's wrong with me? But what if nothing is wrong at all? Carl Jung wrote that the psyche is a self-regulating system, one that continues to function even when our conscious mind collapses. The ego may believe everything is lost, but the unconscious keeps working beneath the rubble, quietly restoring balance. What you call numbness might actually be your soul rebuilding its internal architecture. The silence after the storm isn't an absence, it's sacred labor. Think of the nights when you feel cut off from everyone, when you can't explain your sadness, when you long for something unnamed. It might not be emptiness. It might be integration, like the dark soil after heavy rain. Your inner world needs time to settle before anything new can grow. You are not lost. You're being rewritten. The unseen parts of you are trying to find harmony again. Jung described this process as a dialogue between the conscious and the unconscious, an invisible conversation that reshapes who we are from within. The truth is, healing rarely looks like light. It looks like confusion, fatigue, stillness. It looks like losing interest in what once defined you, so that space can be made for what truly belongs. And though the ego panics, the soul knows this is how rebirth begins, not with noise or movement, but with surrender. So, if you're in that silent space now, if your emotions feel muted and your thoughts sound distant, pause before you judge it. The quiet you feel might be the sound of the unconscious breathing again, rebalancing what was once fractured. What you call emptiness may, in fact, be creation in progress. Because sometimes healing doesn't roar. It whispers. It hides beneath the ruins until you are ready to see that what you thought was the end was only the beginning of something wiser, softer, more whole. But here's the question that still lingers in the quiet. How can you know if the stillness is healing, or if it's simply numbness waiting to consume you? There comes a moment when something deep within you starts to move without your consent. You can't explain it logically, and you didn't plan for it. It's as if a quiet current has begun to shift the waters of your soul. You realize that you no longer have the same urge to fix, to rush, to control everything around you. At first, it feels strange, like losing a part of yourself. For years, your vigilance was how you survived. Your mind was always alert, scanning for what could go wrong. But now there's space where the noise used to be, and that silence scares you. You wonder, am I shutting down, or am I finally waking up? Carl Jung wrote about this phenomenon with extraordinary clarity. In Psychology and Religion, he introduced the idea of the autonomy of the unconscious, the recognition that the psyche contains forces that act independently of our conscious will. The psyche, he said, is not wholly under our control. These inner forces have their own rhythm, intelligence, and intention. They are not random impulses. They are part of the self-regulating nature of the soul. When the conscious ego collapses under the weight of exhaustion or control, the unconscious steps forward, not to sabotage, but to guide us back toward balance. It's as if a wiser hand inside us takes over the steering wheel when our smaller self can no longer see the road. Imagine someone who has lived for years trapped in anxiety. Every detail must be planned, every conversation rehearsed, every risk minimized. Control becomes her armor. She believes that if she can anticipate every possibility, she'll stay safe. But one day, something shifts. She forgets to double-check the door. She stops replaying that old conversation in her head. There's still uncertainty, but it no longer rules her. At first, she panics. What's wrong with me? Am I becoming careless? She interprets the calm as apathy, as if she's losing touch with life. But in truth, her soul is learning to trust the flow again. The unconscious has begun to balance what the conscious mind distorted. It's not detachment, it's restoration. Jung believed that true transformation doesn't come from willpower, but from relationship, the dialogue between the conscious and unconscious parts of ourselves. When the ego loosens its grip, something sacred begins to breathe again. The psyche corrects itself, often in ways we can't see or measure. Nightmares begin to soften, emotions start to flow, synchronicities appear at the right moment, as if the universe itself is responding to your surrender. This is the mystery of healing. When you finally stop trying to manage everything, the deeper intelligence within you awakens. It rearranges your inner world in silence, just as the body heals a wound without needing your permission. The ego resists because it fears irrelevance. It believes that if it doesn't control, everything will collapse. But healing asks for cooperation, not domination. It asks that you trust the rhythm that moves beneath thought, the rhythm that knows how to rebuild what life has broken. So when the storm of control begins to fade and you find yourself strangely at peace, resist the urge to label it numbness. It might be grace. The same force that once drove your anxiety is now teaching you stillness. You are not disconnecting from life. You are reconnecting to its source. Because what if the relief you feel is not loss, but surrender? What if letting go is not the end of effort, but the beginning of alignment? And yet, there remains one question that quietly hums beneath this newfound calm, the one that every soul must face when it stops fighting. What truly happens inside us when we finally stop struggling and let life take the lead? Healing rarely arrives through logic. It arrives through correction. Deep within the psyche, a mysterious mechanism is always at work, one that seeks balance the same way nature restores an ecosystem after storm. Jung called it compensation, the unconscious responding to whatever the conscious mind refuses to see. In The Nature of the Psyche, he wrote, "The gathering of these facts explains the complementary attitude of the unconscious toward consciousness." When the ego becomes too rigid, too certain, too one-sided, the unconscious doesn't stay silent. It begins to speak in symbols, dreams, and unexpected events. It's like a hidden pulse moving beneath the surface of your daily life. You might notice it first in your dreams. Perhaps you've been fighting constantly with someone, and then you dream of embracing them, both of you laughing like children. Or you've been holding back your emotions, pretending to be fine, and then your dream shows a flood breaking through a dam. The psyche compensates for what the conscious self denies, not to punish you, but to restore wholeness. The images are not random. They are the soul's way of saying, you've gone too far in one direction. Come back. You can see this mechanism everywhere once you begin to pay attention. A slip of the tongue that reveals what your heart truly wants. A sudden illness that forces you to rest after months of overwork. A coincidence that feels almost too meaningful. Meeting someone who says exactly what you needed to hear. Stumbling upon a book that names the feeling you couldn't describe. These are not accidents. They are the psyche's way of balancing itself. Jung described them as acts of meaning, moments when the inner and outer worlds mirror each other through synchronicity. The invisible conversation between your consciousness and your unconscious becomes visible for a second, and you feel the strange recognition. Life just spoke to me. Every symptom, every dream, every mistake is an attempt at reconciliation. The unconscious doesn't judge, it compensates. When you lose touch with emotion, it sends tears. When you drown in emotion, it sends detachment. When you chase control, it gives you chaos until you remember how to trust again. The soul is always searching for symmetry. What looks like suffering is often the psyche's way of restoring it. But the ego resists this dance. It wants to stay in charge, to define what's right and what's wrong, to decide when healing should arrive. And yet, the deeper intelligence of the unconscious doesn't follow our timelines. It waits. It arranges. It keeps sending messages through symbols until we listen. Perhaps that's why certain moments feel charged with meaning. A dream that lingers for weeks. A phrase that won't leave your mind. a stranger's words that echo your secret doubts. The unconscious doesn't shout. It whispers through patterns. And if we're wise enough to notice, we realize it's not the world conspiring against us. It's our own soul trying to find its way home. Because when you stop dismissing the strange and start listening to it, you realize that healing has been pursuing you all along, disguised as coincidence. But what happens when we resist this natural movement of the soul? When we silence the messages meant to guide us back to balance? The more you try to silence what hurts, the louder it echoes through every corner of your being. The ego believes that control is safety, that if it can label, organize, and suppress the chaos within, peace will follow. But repression doesn't bring peace. It builds pressure. It's like trying to hold back the tide with your bare hands. At first, it seems to work. You manage your emotions, keep your composure, look in control. Yet, somewhere deep inside, the water keeps rising. Jung saw this clearly. When consciousness becomes one-sided, the unconscious begins to compensate. It doesn't ask for permission. It doesn't care for your plans. It seeks wholeness, and if necessary, it will break the structures that confine the soul. The more you deny your pain, the more your body begins to speak it. The more you suppress anger, the more fatigue sets in. The more you hide sadness, the heavier your chest feels. What we refuse to face with awareness returns as symptom, as dream, as emptiness that no achievement can fill. At first, repression feels like strength. You can function, perform, keep up appearances. You become efficient at pretending. But as months turn into years, something vital begins to fade. You still wake up, you still go to work, you still smile when expected, but the light that once animated you starts to dim. Life becomes mechanical, repetitive, eerily hollow. People say you're doing well, but inside, it feels like you're slowly disappearing. This is what Jung meant when he said that a person cut off from the unconscious loses their soul. You exist, but you no longer feel. And when you no longer feel, everything that once mattered begins to blur. Beauty becomes background noise. Love becomes routine. Even the things you once prayed for now feel strangely distant. The ego insists it's fine. This is adulthood. It says, but the unconscious knows better. Beneath the numbness, a storm gathers. You begin to dream of floods, of breaking glass, of fire. Your body aches without reason. Small irritations become unbearable. These are not random malfunctions. They are cries for integration, the soul begging to be heard. Repression, in its most tragic form, is the ego's attempt to play God. It decides what deserves light and what must be buried. It forgets that it is not the architect of life, only a guest within it. The cure becomes disease when the ego wants to be divine. Because the ego can control behavior, but not the soul. The soul is older, wilder, and infinitely more honest. It doesn't negotiate with denial. It dismantles it. It will use any means necessary to bring you back to yourself, even if it must undo everything you built in pride. You can see this in quiet breakdowns that no one else notices. The executive who begins to cry in the car for no reason. The mother who feels empty after years of giving everything. The man who succeeds in every visible way yet feels haunted by an invisible ache. These are not failures of will. They are the unconscious reclaiming its right to exist. And here lies the paradox. What feels like destruction is often the beginning of restoration. The psyche is not cruel, it's precise. It knows what must fall so that something truer can stand. Jung discovered that behind the collapse, there's always an order trying to emerge, a wisdom greater than the mind strategies. Dreams start to return. Meaning begins to flicker again, faint but real. If you learn to listen to that quiet inner voice, the one that doesn't shout but hums like distant thunder, you'll realize that healing has been there all along, waiting for your surrender. Beneath the exhaustion and the numbness, the self, that deep center of wholeness Jung spoke of, is already working to restore balance. It only needs one thing from you: trust. Because even when resistance has made you sick, the soul never stops trying to heal you. You only have to stop fighting and begin to listen. Healing begins the moment you stop running from your pain and turn toward it with curiosity. Where the ache in your chest, the fatigue that lingers, the recurring dream that won't leave you alone, aren't flaws to fix but messages from the deepest parts of your being. Jung called this inner dialogue the transcendent function, the sacred bridge between consciousness and the unconscious. It is through this bridge that the psyche finds wholeness. In The Nature of the Psyche, he explained that when the opposites within us, reason and emotion, control and surrender, light and shadow, learn to meet instead of fight, a living third thing is born. This third thing is the new attitude of the soul, the point where healing becomes creation. This process doesn't happen all at once. It unfolds slowly in layers, in 4 living movements that keep repeating like a spiral of growth. 1. Recognize the symptoms as messages. Every discomfort has meaning. The anxiety that won't subside, the sadness that appears without a reason, the recurring conflict that keeps resurfacing. None of it is random. They are letters from the unconscious, written in the language of symbols. The psyche doesn't speak in words. It speaks in sensations, synchronicities, and moods. When you stop labeling these experiences as bad and start asking why now, or what are you trying to show me, the healing begins. A sleepless night might reveal a truth you've ignored. A sudden illness might invite you to slow down. A wave of irritation might be a call to reclaim a boundary you've been afraid to set. What looks like chaos is often communication. 2. Dialogue with the inner images. Once you begin to listen, the unconscious responds with images, dreams, intuitions, sudden creative impulses. Jung encouraged people to meet these images halfway, to let them speak. You can do this by writing, drawing, meditating, or simply sitting in silence and allowing the image to unfold. Imagine your anxiety as a figure sitting across from you. What would it say? What does it need? This isn't fantasy. It's psychological truth made visible. When you write to your inner figures, you translate silence into meaning. As one image leads to another, you start to sense a pattern, a thread connecting the fragments of your experience. That thread is your own unconscious guiding you back to balance. 3. Integrate what was denied. Sooner or later, you'll meet the shadow, the part of you that holds everything you rejected or repressed. It's not the monster you think it is. It's the part of you that was exiled to keep you loved or safe. The anger you hide, the jealousy you deny, the grief you numb, all of it lives there. Integration doesn't mean glorifying these traits. It means owning them so they no longer own you. Jung said, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." When you stop judging your shadow and begin to understand it, compassion grows where fear used to live. You realize that what you thought was bad was often just wounded. The more you integrate, the freer you become, not perfect, but whole. 4. Act with awareness. Healing is not complete until it reaches your behavior. Inner realization without outer embodiment becomes illusion. The new balance you discover within must express itself in action, sometimes in the smallest ways. Saying no without guilt, allowing yourself to rest without apology, choosing silence over unnecessary explanation, speaking your truth even if your voice trembles. These microactions are the rituals of transformation. They are how the psyche tests the strength of its new structure. Each conscious act aligns your outer life with your inner truth, and little by little, you start to feel the presence of your own soul guiding your steps. This is a path of the transcendent function, a sacred dance between opposites that gives birth to a third thing, a consciousness that is both grounded and open, both human and divine. You begin to see that the purpose of pain was never punishment, but awakening. What once fractured you now becomes the meeting place of your healing. But beware, this path, though luminous, is not without danger, because once the light appears, the ego will try to claim it, to wear it as proof of superiority or control. The unconscious is patient, but it's also exacting. It will test your humility again and again until you understand. True healing is not about becoming more powerful. It's about becoming more real. And even the path of healing can hide its own subtle traps. Every path toward awakening glimmers with light. But if you look closely, that same light casts its own shadows. Growth, if misunderstood, can become another mask for illusion. Jung knew this well. Every advance of consciousness, he wrote, is bought with loss of innocence. The moment we begin to see, the ego wants to claim ownership of the vision. It whispers, I am awakened now. I understand what others cannot. And in that subtle whisper, the sacred work of healing turns into another performance of control. The first trap is ego inflation, the belief that awareness makes you superior. You learn to read your dreams, recognize your patterns, speak of shadow and light, and suddenly you begin to feel above those still struggling in the dark. But the more light you hold, the greater the responsibility to remain humble. Jung warned in The Ego and the Unconscious that when the ego identifies itself with the divine center, it swells beyond measure and loses its human proportion. Awareness without humility becomes spiritual vanity. The soul's language turns into slogans, and growth becomes competition. True consciousness doesn't separate, it connects. It doesn't elevate you above others. It deepens your compassion for them. The second trap is spiritual isolation, mistaking introspection for escape. When you begin to see the noise of the world, it's tempting to turn away from it entirely. You start saying, I just need to protect my energy. And little by little, you begin to live behind invisible walls. Solitude becomes a shield against life. But individuation, as Jung taught, isn't about withdrawal. It's about participation. The goal isn't to detach from the world, but to find your wholeness within it. You're meant to walk through life, not float above it. To wash the dishes with the same awareness you bring to meditation. To bring presence to chaos, not hide from it. The more you isolate, the more sterile your light becomes. Pure but lifeless, untouched by human warmth. The third trap is regression to pain, the unconscious addiction to suffering. It begins with noble intention, to face your wounds, to heal your past. But somewhere along the way, the pain starts to define you. You begin to equate depth with darkness, thinking that joy means you're being shallow or avoiding the real work. You sabotage peace, confuse drama with growth, and secretly fear what life would feel like if it didn't hurt. But Jung reminded us that the purpose of encountering the shadow isn't to live in it forever. It's to integrate it and move beyond. The goal of transformation is not endless catharsis. It's creative life. Suffering refines you only until you learn to live without it. These pitfalls can be seen in the story of the healer, who fell in love with his own mirror. He spent years exploring the mysteries of the human soul, learning the language of dreams and the secrets of symbols. One day, he caught sight of his reflection and was mesmerized by how much he seemed to know. He mistook his reflection for the divine itself and forgot that the mirror was only a tool. He stopped tending to the world, stopped loving, stopped listening. He became trapped in the beauty of his own awareness, illuminated but alone. That's the danger of spiritual work without grounding. It becomes self-adoration disguised as enlightenment. Jung warned that the goal of individuation is not to separate from life, but to return to it with greater wholeness. The self does not isolate, it incarnates. To individuate is to bring heaven into earth, spirit into matter, insight into relationship. You become whole not by leaving the world, but by living in it consciously. Cooking, working, forgiving, laughing, creating, failing, and still remaining awake. And something miraculous begins when you finally accept all your contradictions. When you stop trying to be only light and let the shadow stand beside it. You realize the goal was never perfection. It was integration. And in that acceptance, a quiet alchemy happens. Fear turns into compassion. Pain turns into wisdom. Solitude turns into connection. Because when you finally accept every part of yourself, the saint and the sinner, the healer and the wounded, something extraordinary begins to unfold. The inner and outer world start to dance together, and life itself begins to move through you like a prayer finally answered. Healing doesn't mean you'll never feel pain again. It means that when pain returns, you no longer collapse beneath its weight. You no longer mistake discomfort for danger or endings for punishment. The storm still comes, the sky still darkens, but you stand differently now. Your feet are steady, your breath is calm, and your heart whispers, I've been here before, and I know how to walk through this. That's the invisible proof of healing. You stop running from the wound and start walking with it. The same emotions that once drowned you now move through you like tides. You don't fight them, you allow them. They come, they swell, and then they pass. The scar remains, but it no longer burns. It glimmers softly under the sun, a symbol not of pain but of transformation. The place that once bled has become a doorway where light enters. You begin to realize that healing is not an escape from suffering, but a new relationship with it. There's a quiet wisdom inside you now, one that doesn't seek to control life, but to flow with it. You stop chasing constant happiness and start honoring the rhythm of joy and sorrow as two parts of the same breath. Even your mistakes begin to look different, not as failures, but as teachers. The mirror that once reflected shame now shows resilience. You look at yourself and think, I survived the fire, and I became it. Jung understood that this state marks the true completion of individuation, not perfection, but integration. Man becomes whole only through the knowledge and acceptance of his unconscious. He wrote in the man and his symbols, pages 20 to 21. You stop trying to eliminate your darkness and instead learn to coexist with it. The unconscious no longer needs to shout through symptoms or dreams. It has been given a voice in your conscious life. What was once split, the thinker and the feeler, the shadow and the light, now move together. You notice this wholeness in the smallest, most human moments. You take a deep breath instead of reacting. You forgive yourself before asking for forgiveness from others. You say no without guilt, and yes without fear. You allow silence to exist between words without needing to fill it. You no longer chase meaning. You embody it. There's peace, not because everything is perfect, but because you've stopped demanding perfection. The invisible sign of true healing is humility. You no longer need to announce your progress, prove your strength, or explain your peace. You become a quiet presence, grounded, compassionate, awake. The same world that once overwhelmed you now feels alive with purpose. You begin to see meaning in the mundane. The way sunlight lands on a cup of coffee, the way wind moves through the trees, the way laughter rises after tears. The inner and outer worlds have begun to mirror each other. The unconscious no longer hides beneath the surface. It breathes through every gesture, every choice, every moment you live with awareness. Healing is not about becoming untouchable. It's about becoming unafraid. You realize that vulnerability isn't weakness. It's wisdom. You can sit with pain, look in the eye, and say, you are welcome here, but you no longer rule me. That's when you know you've returned home to yourself. The scar no longer defines you. It reminds you. The silence no longer frightens you. It nourishes you. The darkness no longer consumes you. It completes you. Healing is when the soul learns to breathe within the pain. If this video touched your soul, comment below. I trust the process. And continue your journey of self-discovery and wholeness.